Hello. I'm going to wait a few minutes to make sure we get all of our attendees in and everyone is able to join. I see people are still joining the webinar. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. All right. I see people are still joining. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We have 80 people on the line today. Thank you all so much for joining us today. All right, we're at 2 minutes, so hello and welcome to today's Better Buildings webinar. In this series, Better Buildings, DOE laboratory scientists and leading professionals will be providing updates on relevant research and technology, addressing frequently asked questions by building operators, identifying opportunities to enhance energy efficiency, and discussing lessons learned from the pandemic to build resiliency. I'm your moderator, Mariana Ejea Casalduc. I am an ORI Science, Technology, and Policy Fellow with the Commercial Buildings Integration Team in the DOE Building Technologies Office. I'm also the Better Buildings Healthcare Sector Lead. Thank you all for being with us today. We have a wonderful session prepared and a fantastic speakers lined up and ready to introduce themselves in just a moment. But before we dive in, I'd like to go over some brief housekeeping items. First, you have joined on a muted line. All questions for our speakers will go through Slido, and we will show you how to submit those questions in just a moment. If you're having any trouble with your GoToWebinar features, please chat our technical support using the chat function. And please note, today's session is being recorded and will be made available on the Better Buildings Solutions Center. Like I mentioned, we're excited to announce that today we will be using an interactive platform called Slido for polling and Q&A. At this moment, you can go to www.slido.com using your mobile device or by opening a new window in your internet browser. Today's event code is #DOE. If you would like to ask our panelists any questions, please submit them at any time throughout the presentation, and we'll be answering your questions near the end of the session. You can select the thumbs up icon for questions that you like, which will result in the most popular questions moving to the top of the queue. Now, we're going to start things off with a few polls just to get to know our audience. So please join us over at Slido to respond to those polls. Like I said, today's event code is #DOE. We only have 2 questions today, so which sector do you represent? I see we have folks from healthcare, the national labs, commercial real estate, higher education, hospitality, the industrial sector, and state and local governments, and federal government. Thank you all so much for responding. I'm going to leave that up a little bit longer. Thank you so much for responding. You have a strong showing today from the industrial and commercial real estate sectors. All right. I think we can move on to our next poll. This is an open answer. Which topics would you like to be discussed during future webinars? Funding, definitely. IAQ in schools. We will be discussing bipolar ionization today. Unoccupied buildings. Wonderful. Thank you all so much for answering. Okay, I'm going to leave that up for a little bit longer. Okay, wonderful. I think we can wrap up the polling and move on. Thank you everyone so much for answering our polls. With that, I'm happy to move on to our presentation portion of today's session. First, I would like to introduce Marcus Bianchi, Senior Research Engineer at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. Marcus is going to introduce the Space Conditioning Technology team. Marcus?
Yes, thank you, Mariana. I'm Marcus Bianchi, and along with Greg Shukas and Michael DeRue, we run the Space Conditioning research team in the Better Buildings Alliance within NREL. And so at NREL, we host and do research in different aspects of space conditioning. And since we are talking about technologies that involve ventilation, filtration, and so on, there's a natural synergy with space conditioning. Mariana, can we go to the next slide? Just quickly to point you to a resource, we have an HVAC resource map that we host at NREL with a lot of information about different technologies in HVAC. So please, if you have a chance to access this resource that we keep updating and adding new technologies to it. And with that, Mariana, I'll send it back to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Marcus. Now I'm going to introduce today's presenters, Dr. Marwa Zaatari and Dr. Seema Bhangar. Dr. Marwa Zaatari is a partner at DZINE Partners and co-chair of the Enverid Systems Advisory Board. She leads the research and development of air as a service around heat exchanger coils, ventilation, filtration, and IAQ measurements. Her work continues to advance building science methods in assessing performance-based procedures to design and operate buildings to optimize energy and people efficiency. Dr. Zaatari has extensive experience in identifying and quantifying the sources, fate, and transport of indoor air pollutants, building energy and environmental management, assessing performance-based procedures of HVAC ventilation and air cleaning, and developing and applying models for energy efficiency, indoor air quality, exposure assessment, and the economic impacts of indoor air pollution. Dr. Seema Bhangar is a senior indoor air quality manager at WeWork, a commercial real estate company that provides flexible workspaces. Her mission is to drive the use of new science and technology for designing, building, and operating buildings that are better for health and productivity and more resilient and more energy efficient. She specializes in indoor air quality research projects with a focus on applying human-centric approaches to environmental sensing and in building and transportation systems. Now, as a reminder, please send in any questions for our panelists through Slido by going to slido.com and typing in the event code #DOE, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can at the end of the session. At this point, I'd like to pass things on to Marwa. Marwa, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mariana. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to share with you the latest updates from ASHRAE. And specifically today, the conversation will be about filtration and air cleaning. Next slide, please. So this is the agenda. First, I'm going to start with the basics of the core recommendations, and then I want to share with you 6 myths regarding filtration and air cleaning. And my goal today is to simplify it very much so we can basically discuss on the basics only. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start of how personally I do an approach to a pandemic plan. So the first thing I consider is airborne transmission. So here we talk about source removal and dilution. So specifically mechanical filters and dilution in terms of outside air. And also we can talk about source control in terms of how many occupants are present in the space. The second step is multiple layer defense strategies. I cannot stress this enough. There's no one magic bullet to solve this problem or indoor air quality in general. So in my talk today, I will focus on the basics that worked before COVID, that we know they're working during COVID and will work after COVID. The third item is that we need to consider a specific plan for specific space and activity type. So when we talk about a church, different than a gymnasium, different than a classrooms, etc., we need to take into consideration the activity type, the age of occupants. And the last one, if we want to go one step further, I talk about risk, about first cost, energy impact, and carbon impact. And I developed this metric called dollar per risk reduction. So what's really important is that if we're spending money, and always the budgets are limited, we spend it in a way that will get us the better return in terms of risk reduction. Next slide, please. So in this slide, I want to show you the latest core recommendations, 1 to 5 from ASHRAE and number 6 from Harvard and UC Boulder, and many other experts will talk about air exchange rate. I want to show you this to show you how basic we can actually attain the air exchange rate goals. The first one is ventilation. You probably have heard this already from many experts. When we talk about ventilation in the United States, we're talking about mechanical ventilation being forced through the HVAC system. And the requirement here is to at least satisfy ASHRAE standard 62.1, which is basically it's the ventilation and acceptable indoor air quality, and this standard is adopted in most cities and states. Number 2 is to have MERV 13. We talk about mechanical filters. I will discuss them a little bit later. And if you cannot put MERV 13, we can put something equivalent to MERV 13. Also, I will be discussing it a little bit later. Number 3, it goes without saying, we need to maintain design temperature, relative humidity. Number 4 is to do flush out. By flush out, it means we are cleaning the air before occupants come in, or if you have like space type like a theater or communities of faith where you have 2 groups of people. So when group 1 leaves, you need to make sure to wait and turn on your system or keep your system on, filtration, ventilation, so group 1 doesn't infect group 2. Number 5, it goes without saying as well, is we need to maintain the HVAC system, clean coils, fan belts, etc. And this is something that we see often neglected in the operation. And it's time to basically follow the standard that tell us what the checklist is to maintain our systems and to make sure they are basically performing as close as possible to the design, to their design, basically. Number 6 is target air exchange rate. You probably have heard this already air exchange rate per hour. The math is sort of straightforward. You take the volume of either outside air and or filtered air and or cleaned air, you divide by the volume of the room, and then you transform from basically minutes to hours. And there's a detailed guidance on the CDC website how to basically understand what air exchange rate per hour means in terms of removal of contaminants. But basically here, the advice is at least to have 4 to 6 air exchange rate per hour. And this is directly from Harvard and UC Boulder. ASHRAE is working on a guidance, what is the goal to achieve, and it might be different than air exchange rate per hour. Next slide, please. Now, we have a total of 20 minutes. There are a lot of myths out there. I chose for you 6 that I feel like they're very important to talk about. Next slide, please. The first one is particulate filters do not work. And particulate filters here, I'm talking about, mechanical filters. They have fibrous media or stretched membranes. Let me start with the basics. So usually we are accustomed to talk about PM 2.5 and PM 10. So that's particulate matter less than 2.5 micron and particulate matter less than 10 micron. So at the beginning of this pandemic, exactly a year ago, we were told that the coronavirus is so small. How small? 0.1 micron. You see it in the blue dot. And then we basically start learning and understanding that the main basically path of this disease transmission is airborne. So 2 basically news that they were not actually very good, that the virus is so small, and the second thing is airborne, can be basically everywhere. Next slide, please. However, aerosol scientists and decades of research tell us that, because of the nature of the virus, the actual measured viral RNA is in the size range mostly greater than 1 micron. And I show you here a size distribution adopted by basically ASHRAE. So most of the particle sizes are more than 1 micron. And why is this good news? Well, and what does it mean to us in terms of particulate filtration? In the graph I show you, on the y-axis is efficiency, on the x-axis is particulate size. Can you hit next, please? In the red box, I show you here the most size of interest, which is 1 to 5 micron. And if you follow with me MERV 13, which is orange, you would see that for the MERV 13, between 1 to 5 micron, the efficiency is actually greater than 85%, between 80 to 90%. Next slide, please. So what does this mean to us? MERV 13, according to this calculation, what's published by ASHRAE, is at least 87% efficient. So imagine this. Let's say you don't have any outside air. Most of the air in our building is recirculated air, and this air is going through an 87% efficient filter. That's where the good news is. And not only that, MERV 11 will have 72% and MERV 7, 44%. And MERV 8 is not here, but it's around 55%. That's published on the ASHRAE building readiness guidance. So this is what's really good. So it's a myth that particulate filters do not work. They work, and they work very efficiently. And here, just go back to the basics. We have a standard. It's called ASHRAE standard 52.2. And international, we have an ISO standard. It's very well established. You can understand the efficiency, and you can understand also the pressure drop. And the other good news is that they are really cheap. For a 1,000 square feet classroom, it costs around $50 per year. $50 per year to obtain an air exchange rate greater than 4. So I'm gonna just repeat this. Using MERV 13, you pay $50 per year for a 1,000 square foot classroom, and to get you more than 4 air exchange rate. So this is where it's really good news. We have it proven, and we've used it for a long time. Next slide, please. I hear this all the time. Myth number 2 is that, we cannot use MERV 13 because it's gonna choke my system. The fan is gonna, choke, gonna reduction in airflow, and I'm doing something counterintuitive. Next slide, please. So this is actually a myth. I've been doing a lot of research in this field. It was actually one of my PhD topic. I show you here, just for the purpose of the comparison, 2-inch, which is the depth of the filter, pressure drop on the y-axis, different MERV on the x-axis. For simplicity, I show you MERV 8, 11, 13. You can easily find a MERV 13 filter that have equal or lower pressure drop than MERV 11 and MERV 8. So this is a myth. It's highly unlikely that your system is not able to take a MERV 13 filter. And if for any reason, if it cannot, you can still use MERV 11, even MERV 8, if you know when to change it on a good schedule. Next slide, please. This is in the same line of the previous slide, is that if you use a MERV 13, it's not necessary that you're going to increase your pressure drop. You need to know how to select them. You can choose a MERV 13 that have lower pressure drop than your existing system. On this graph, I show you on the y-axis the virus efficiency, on the x-axis the pressure drop. Inside the green box is where you can have a MERV 13 filter that have lower, equal or lower pressure drop than existing filter. Next slide, please. Let's say for some reason, maybe you don't have a place to put filters for some weird design of the system. Maybe you have a DOAS and a VRV, so a local system that cannot take a filter. I hear this myth: if you cannot change your filter, you're not doomed. Luckily, we have solutions on the market, also proven. Next slide, please. And it's basically a very basic fan and a HEPA filter. HEPA filter can remove basically more than 99% of all virus sizes, or of all particulate sizes, more than 99%. And here you don't need more than a fan and a HEPA. We don't need to look fancy or look for fancy solutions. I show you here two different models in general. One can be portable and the other one fixed. And in this case, I show you one model that's fixed to the ceiling. Again, fan and a filter. I've been doing accumulate data for 40 different air cleaners. I can tell you that there are a lot of them that just do a fan and a HEPA filter. And there is a way to select them. Basically, this is the rule of thumb here, is that you need CADR, clean air delivery rate 300 for each 500 square feet. And here a caution, there is a lot of misleading marketing on the market that say basically almost HEPA or HEPA function, HEPA efficiency, near HEPA, HELPA. Those all, stay away from them. It's either HEPA or not HEPA. Next slide, please. So I want to show you here how to mix and match between the different strategies to obtain your air exchange rate goal. On the y-axis is the air exchange rate per hour, and that's a summation between outside air, shown in blue, a MERV filter, shown in orange, an air purifier, a HEPA, and a fan, shown in gray. On the x-axis are the different strategies, and I did this calculation for a 15,000 square feet office, 75 people. And let me start with the scenario that should be in our buildings today, is the first one, which is the minimum outside air per ASHRAE standard 62.1. So this is in the US. Most systems have mechanical ventilation and design for ASHRAE standard 62.1 and the MERV 8. So you will be, 2.9 air exchange rate for a MERV filter and 0.9 air exchange rate for outside air. So a little bit less than 4. Now, if you go with the ASHRAE recommendation, you will be on the third line, which is minimum outside air 62.1 plus a MERV 13. Easily, you can attain 6. And then you can do, more with using air cleaners. If you are in a city that you can have, for example, wildfires and you need to close down the outside air damper, you can substantiate the rest with portable air cleaning or fixed air cleaning. But here the message from the slide is that to follow the expert recommendations and also ASHRAE core recommendation is very easy and very basic. You need the amount of ventilation that you had when you designed the building plus MERV 13. If you cannot do this combination, you can opt for a HEPA and a fan to substitute the rest with basically portable or fixed air cleaning. That's it. You don't need more than that. Next slide, please. Now, myth number 5, I have about there is a magic bullet to indoor air quality. I've been doing some research to see specifically schools, commercial buildings, federal institutions, what are they using in terms of respond to COVID, especially with all the relief money and the funds we got. And I've seen basically a rise in the sales of what we call electronic air cleaners, and they are being marketed as a magic bullet to indoor air quality. Click, please. So I want to attempt in this basically a few slides to clarify what are electronic air cleaners. And this is an industry jargon, so it can be something different. And I'm going to show you a specific case where I'm going to debunk what the manufacturer claim versus what 2 independent studies found. So first, there are a lot of names when we talk about electronic air cleaners. I listed some of them here, but the most names we see are bipolar ionization, needlepoint bipolar ionization, plasma, photocatalytic oxidation, or UV-PCO, or just PCO, etc. And some of the names are very fancy. Some of them are, very innovative, I have to say, like fragrance sponge. It's fancy and, attractive. Click, please. Click one more time. Although there are a lot of names, actually the underlying mechanism is the same. So these technologies will use a variety of methods to create ions or reactive oxygen species like, ozone, hydroxyl, radicals. And here the chemistry facts are very straightforward. So usually they tell you to install it in a duct, maybe after the coil, usually after the filter, and supposedly it will create these, they call them soldiers, these basically reactive oxygen species, and they will go to the space and magically they will find, the virus or the bad bacteria, and just this one deactivated, or have all the particle agglomerate together, and then the filter will basically pick them up. So chemistry fact 1, from the mechanism, we know that free radicals and or ozone are produced. Chemistry fact 2, we know that unpredictable reactions will occur. We will not every time do complete oxidation. So you will develop basically intermediate byproducts that might be more harmful than when we started with. And we have basically many research out there that tell us, for example, you can introduce volatile organic compounds, aldehydes such as formaldehyde, which is a known cancerogenic, and for example, ultrafine particles. And some of them produce ozone, which we know all the problems in it. Ozone indoors need to be less than 5 per billion. So you need to check more the certification of what you are buying. Next slide, please. So I'm going to focus on this technology because I heard a lot about it. I've been studying it for many years, needlepoint bipolar ionization. So the manufacturers specifically claim that they can reduce particulate matter by basically agglomerating the different particles together. They do surface inactivation of more than 99% of SARS-CoV-2 and removal of VOCs and formaldehyde. 2 clicks, please. So this is basically screenshots, and you will have the slides later. You can check them out, screenshots. The one for surface, before they just reported 99.9% and now they added the disclaimer just for surface. Next slide, please. So there are 2 independent research that I'm going to mention here. So first, the manufacturers say 89.7% of reduction of particles. This is a research, and I put the link here, was done by a partnership of 3 different universities. 2 of them were my colleagues at the University of Texas at Austin. But basically what they did is a series of experiments in a chamber and also field test, and they follow what the manufacturer recommendation is in terms of where to put it and what filter to put before it. And I show you here the graph, the series graph. They measured for location before and after the device, and also in indoor air and outdoor air. And they found that the device did not really impact particulate matter concentration. You can see basically between the upstream and downstream, and in the indoor air, you see rise between 1 to 10 micron. Next slide, please. The second thing is that about the claim of high efficiency regarding virus. This is a totally different study. They did a chamber test where they put the device with and without a MERV 8 filter, and they show the % reduction. But what's really important is that every time you look at a study, you need to understand what is the natural decay. So how would the performance be if we didn't have any device? So it's always with the device and without the device. So the natural decay is present in red, in dark red, and then the effectiveness of the device is present in blue and green. And you can see it's between 20 to 30% effective, not as the manufacturer claim. And the other thing is that when they tested this device, it was 100 CFM, but the manufacturers say that this device can be up to 6,000 CFM. So if you do the ratio of ions versus airflow, you would basically conclude that the efficiency would be even lower in real scenarios where you have 6,000 CFM. Next slide, please. This is another one I showed you at the beginning. The manufacturer claimed more than 99.9% of surface removal. Based on this study, Again, there is no difference of deactivation of the virus with and without the device. Next slide, please. This is the last one. The manufacturer claim removal of VOCs, of formaldehyde. Basically, both independent studies, the one by universities and the one by basically the second one I show you. There is a link on the previous slide. Actually, this device produced some VOCs and had zero impact on formaldehyde. You can see in the graph natural decay versus the impact of the device. Next slide, please. Now, the takeaway from the needle point bipolar ionization is that at best it doesn't work, and at worst it can produce byproducts. So it's very, very important to take a look at peer-reviewed independent studies before you make your purchase. Ashley was very clear about that. Use only proven technologies, and many experts say the same. I'm going to conclude with this slide about UVGI. Also, I've seen a lot of confusion about it. So we have two things I'm going to talk about, UVGI and UV-PCO. Click, please. So I advise you here to read about UVGI from Dr. Banflest. He did decades of research about it. UVGI is not new. It's not new. It's actually a proven technology. We have a guideline in ASHRAE and also standard. So you as a designer, you as an owner, an operator, actually can open it and know what to design for. And ASHRAE has specific design requirement of what you need to use specific for the kill rate of or inactivation rate of SARS-CoV-2. Usually you put it after the coils or in duct or upper room. Next, click please. Do not confuse UVGI with UV-PCO. So UV-PCO is photocatalytic oxidation, and UV is one of the components that basically the UV light will shine a light on a catalyst and they produce oxygen species. I talked a little bit about it before. Basically UV-PCO is not proven and still we don't know how to apply it. We don't know the byproducts of it. Next slide, please. So this was my presentation for today. I had to run fast for the time. Feel free to reach out to me, my email, Twitter, or LinkedIn. My conclusion for today is very easy to attain the 4 to 6 air exchange rate if you follow the basic recommendation of ventilation, MERV filters, and HEPA air cleaners. Stay away from electronic air cleaners, including ionizers, PCO, and all the different innovative names that we're gonna hear about. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Marwa. Now I'm going to be handing things off to Seema. Are you ready? Awesome.
Yes.
Take it away.
Hello, everyone. From Marwa, you have all the technical information on ventilation and filtration interventions. So my part of the talk doesn't come from that angle. I'm not going to tell you anything new about efficacy, safety, or mechanism of action of any of these technologies. I'm really here to share more process rather than prescriptive oriented advice and experience. So over the last year, I've really engaged in this field from the perspective of what I like to think of as a translator from the science and technology to guidance and advice for building operators. So I'll share my rubric for decision making, for thinking about this problem space, for triage and prioritization. And what I hope you'll take away are the tools to make a really informed and consistent decision that's right for your context. Marwa emphasized the importance of context-specific decision making as well. And especially with COVID and new technology, it's such a dynamic context on both the problem and the solution side that it's really important, I think, to know how to make a decision and then constantly evaluate it and be agile to new information. So I'll give a standard disclaimer as well that I'm here to express my views. This talk is not to talk about WeWork policies and procedures. So next slide to dive into it. So we'll start. I want to start by just saying, why is this hard? You know, why are so many of you here? I think we heard of 80 people in the room and more who listen to the recording. And in spite of so many hundreds of webinars that have been given on this topic at this stage, and any of them that I've been in end with, you know, quite a few questions unanswered in the chat windows. And fundamentally, it's hard because successful navigation of air treatment technology for COVID requires parsing several highly specialized technical fields, sort of denoted by this cartoon borrowed from my colleagues at Ember Strategies. And so, it's foundationally hard, but it's further, operators are further challenged by three things. One is a marketplace that has magnified the complexity and apparent heterogeneity here by repackaging each class of tech under many different names. Marwa had a very nice list there, and also under different forms. So the explosion in terminology is a little bit obfuscation by marketing, but there's also a real level at which innovation is leading to different types of applications. And, that's a fundamentally good thing. It just adds to the complication of navigating. And then second, there's the aspect of building operators wanting to provide psychological reassurance and a demand for it. So there's a very high consumer demand right now for visible action. And then third, we have a really incomplete evidence base. Some of it is proprietary, some of it is fraught with conflict of interest. And so it can turn into a science in itself, learning how to rationally weigh contradictory sources of opinion. So with that, to the next slide on what I recommend to successfully navigate this challenge. So first, I would say avoid picking the solution first. Start with the problem, and that's really what that cartoon is meant to denote. It seems like a really obvious point, but especially due to the heavy role played by marketing, I think Marwa had myth number 5, the attraction of a silver bullet. There's a pressure. There can be a tendency to start with a solution and then see what problem it can solve. And for COVID, starting with the problem means thinking about discrete transmission pathways of concern. So the first step in evaluating a solution should be to put it in the right box for which pathway it mitigates. So again, it's an obvious point, but worth noting because it's often glossed over. And then second, and this is a bit of a values and philosophy exercise. It's where this talk starts drifting from science into social science. What are you going for? So do you have clear performance targets for risk mitigation, either by each of those pathways or overall? I want my infection risk level to be X, or I want my air change rate to be Y. And just be really clear about what your references are for these and what tools you're relying on for quantifying the impact of solutions on performance. So ASHRAE, REVA, scientists have COVID calculators. There are a lot of tools, and aligning around those makes the endeavor amenable to a more rational optimization exercise. Or if you don't have a design target, maybe you have a fixed pot of money and you want to figure out how to spend it optimally. Or you're just going for more is better. And that's where all of this becomes a bit of a Wild West to gauge how much is enough at that stage. And Simon Turner spoke very eloquently to this at a recent public Johns Hopkins seminar. And then finally, I would say commit to two things. So one is the precautionary principle, responsibility of considering unintended health and safety consequences. Just because something's not been proven unsafe doesn't mean it's safe. And the history of public health is littered with examples of this. And then finally, just what I'm referring to in shorthand as the hygiene hypothesis. So it relates to whether we believe that there is such a thing as a healthy indoor microbiome and that it's beneficial to maintain. So we know this is true for the gut, for ecosystems, and it could be true for indoor air and surfaces as well. So in that case, those of us who think that might be possible are nervous at the prospect of ubiquitously applied environmental sterilization into the post-COVID period. So to go to the next slide. So you start with your problem statement, and then once you've mapped that and oriented around guiding principles, classify the solutions. So first of all, so much complexity in solutions, but fundamentally they all bucket to, is this a removal technology or a transformation technology, something that's trying to inactivate virus? Second, what is the mode of implementation? Is it fixed or portable? Is it induct or in-room? Is it area or personal scale? And then third, where possible, think and plan holistically. So for instance, if you're thinking of human outcomes, ultimately we're going for maximizing well-being, could the same pot of money be better spent pursuing something other than air quality? So think outside the air box. or when thinking of air cleaning, give extra weight to an approach that has co-benefits for other airborne hazard classes beyond SARS-CoV-2. And then, of course, flagged in this box, I won't name all of these. You'll have them in the recording, but there are many practical concerns for operators around context. So compatibility with existing building system capabilities, regional aspects like the outdoor air temperature and pollution, maintenance and labor costs, anticipated future relevance of the intervention, and so on. So with that, I'll just jump to the next slide. So that was all on process, and I don't want to leave it a mystery about where an application of that rubric lands me. So this is now, my current sort of cartoon simplification of recommendations by class of technology at this point of time, given where the evidence base is at and what I know so far. So first of all, big green light to all forms of removal technology. These are completely proven and have substantial co-benefits beyond COVID. So, think of a place with outdoor air pollution. You can zap the particles to inactivate the viruses, but leave the bulk particulate matter in the air, and that's a lost opportunity to kill two birds with one stone. For UV, I have a maybe listed here because it is a proven technology, as Marwa said, and we know how to use it safely and effectively. There's a lot of solid guidance out there by ASHRAE and others. And so it's good for high-risk scenarios. And what to consider is that it may not be necessary in normal use environments. So, of course, the million-dollar question in a pandemic zone, pandemic mode, is what is normal use? Are our buildings right now normal? And so I've put some thoughts here on what to look for. Going on to, at the other end of the spectrum of transformation technology, in red, sort of jumping bullets, any treatment tech that adds reactive oxidant species to a space, big red no. So I'll just echo what Marwa said here. It may have limited value for sterilizing in unoccupied spaces, but do not use it around people until we have firmer safety evidence. And then finally, sandwiched in between in what I think of as a fairly indeterminate space is ionization. So personally, I'm not a fan. I would not use it. My professional judgment, because of where I fall on the precautionary principle primarily. But if you are considering it because of possible benefits and marketing value, at minimum, really do your due diligence, a careful review of safety documentation and testing, and be prepared to act pretty fast if new health evidence emerges that's more definitive. There's already some early health concerns around negative ions exposure. And then the next slide breaks it down a little bit further by mode of implementation. So it's just taking a deep dive for UVGI. You could have a slide like this for each of those tech, but for lack of time, I'll just illustrate with UVGI how once you've triaged the technology classes, the next step is to triage the modes of implementation. And each of these modes addresses a distinct mitigation pathway. So that goes back to what I emphasized at the start, that not all the modes of implementation of a technology address the same pathway of concern. So looking at this group for UV, the opportunity to place it in a duct, in the room, or use it for surface disinfection, my 2 cents based on triage would be the induct airstream disinfection. So this is really geared toward reducing the risk of transmission by the recirculated air pathway. I have rarely found it to be more cost-effective and feasible than a filter upgrade. And by filter upgrade, I mean a filter that removes to achieve equivalent mitigation of risk. The cooling coil application, great for preventing fouling, energy saving, nothing to do with COVID. And a lot of the marketing materials imply that it might have something to do with COVID. The upper air application, I would say this has the highest practical utility potentially of this group. And so great for high-risk environments where it's not feasible to get ventilation up to a desired spec, or you want to enhance what you have with ventilation. The portable filters, again, I would agree with Marwa that, good HEPA filter, if you have a good HEPA filter, adding UV might be overkill. I'd question the value of that added cost and complexity. And then finally, surface disinfection through robots or fixed installs. The bottom line is, for my transmission, is much less of a concern in the latest CDC guidance. So I would just think about whether it's really needed or just a flashy advertising reassurance measure. But that said, if it can replace chemical and labor-heavy cleaning practices, sure. Just, don't fool yourself that it's doing anything for the main mode of transmission, which is air. And then next slide, just a couple of slides to wrap up here. So this one is just a reminder that selecting and installing an air treatment technology is, for a building operator, a bit like filing that dissertation was for PhD students. Your job has just begun. So you selected it, you put it in. If you've installed a proven technology, and now this is another huge advantage of installing something proven, that you can sort of more or less hit go and tap into existing maintenance and training infrastructure. But if you're installing either a new tech or a new application of a tech we consider proven, you need to follow up. And so by that, I mean establish an ongoing process for performance evaluation, track and act on new evidence as it becomes available, and ensure new maintenance protocols are learned and implemented. So this is sort of change management. And then I'll close with a final slide that zooms back out and just reminds us all that, we're doing all this for people. We're making better buildings for people, not for buildings. And we hear a lot these days about that, about human-centric design, and what does it really mean? And I would just sort of leave with a few thoughts. One is that air is more challenging than other elements of IEQ, like acoustics or visual experience, because the perceivable is only a very small part of the overall experience. So we can't simply be driven by the market or what people ask for. We have this, we have this added responsibility of making sure we don't do any harm and really committing to what heals and promotes broad well-being, and educating when that's in conflict with what people are asking for and would be reassured by in a given moment. And so I think the last thing I'll say is, and this is the thing I'm most passionate about, I hope we can really learn through the experience of this pandemic how to talk to each other and how to have rational, consistent, and coherent dialogue and decision making. There's so many hot buttons, high emotions, and big money around this topic that we need to navigate them skillfully so they don't get in the way of our pooling our collective intelligence to achieve best outcomes, both for people and then for our planet. Thanks, that's it.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much for sharing such great presentations. At this time, we're going to begin taking questions from the audience using Slido. So let's transition over to Slido to see what people are asking. And Seema and Marwa, please feel free to join me back up with your cameras. Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, our first question is from Eric, and it's for Seema. Thanks for the presentation. You mentioned UV as a maybe recommendation, as it ubiquitously impacts the microbiome within a space. What about it, I assume, as a sterilization technique, not just for air treatment, but condensate in drip pans? See.
Yeah, thanks, Eric, for that question. If I'm understanding it correctly, I would say this is equivalent to the cooling coil type of treatment, which is very proven and proven to have benefit to avoid harmful microbiological fouling that leads to reduction in energy efficiency. So I'm all for treating the growth of mold and microbes that we do not want in our spaces.
Marwa, do you have any thoughts you want to add based on that question?
I agree with Seema. And if you are talking about cooling coils and drain pans, if they are fouled already, before you install the UV, you have to mechanically clean them. So we have some traditional ones and new ones using enzyme-based technologies to clean the coils before you put UV to treat the problem, basically.
Excellent. We have a question that I think we already touched on this, but if we can please speak to the leakage around MERV 13 filters briefly again.
Yeah, this is a very good question. Like everything else, every single solution or process need to be well, designed, installed, and maintained. This is similar about wearing a mask. We know that masks work, but we know that need to have a good fit. This is the same true for MERV 13 filters or any type of filters. You need to make sure that they are tightly fit in the system, because what happens is that the air will go always to the path of least resistance. So if your filter has some pressure drop, the air will gonna go through the cracks. So it's very important to seal your filters.
Excellent. I think that's related to our next question, which I still want to read out loud. Which filter types typically provide the least pressure drop? Bag filters over pleated propylene filters, perhaps?
Thank you for this question. It really depends on the manufacturer. I cannot stress this enough. I've seen pressure drop all over the map from pleated filters or bag filters. What we know is that usually the more deep is the filter, the less the pressure drop. But it really depends on the manufacturer. What's nice about filters, one more time, is that you can ask the distributor or the filter manufacturer for ASHRAE standard 52.2 if you are in the US, and these tests are readily available and will tell you exactly the pressure drop, how it changed with the feet per minute or the CFM, and also what is the manufacturer suggested final pressure drop. And you can do an average based on that. So this is the beauty of using filters.
Excellent. Marwa, and I think the next question is for you as well, and it refers to core recommendations in ASHRAE 04, which reads, flush out to reduce 95% of the concentration in a space, and it will lead to an increase in the HVAC energy demand. How are we going to achieve net zero energy if we increase the energy demand? Excellent question.
This is a great question. If you refer to the ASHRAE Building Readiness Guide, there's a graph there that's really nice. It shows you the time where you need to basically do the flush out versus the air exchange rate. And hear me out. If you have an air exchange rate total between outside air, filtered air, air cleaning, all of it, 4, so 4 air exchange rate, you only need 1 hour of flush out. And you only need to do it one time. So let's say you have an office building, and you need to do it 1 hour before occupants come. And guess what? It's usually not going to change the way you operate your building, because we need the, the 1 hour for warm up or cool down. So the 1 hour will be okay. But we do it performance based. Now, if you have 6, you'll end up only with 30 minutes. That's really good. And again, it's not only outside air. We talk about all the solution combined.
Excellent. I see a question that's asking about our presentation. It does have a lot of information, and it will be available at the resource, the COVID-19 Resource Center in the Better Building Solutions Center. I wanted to quickly address that. And then I think one more question, what role do windows, skylight, doors play in creating a solution? I feel like you can both address this.
Sure, I can chime in. I would treat that as natural UV. Marwa, anything to add from your side?
So I received a lot of comments about this, about windows and doors. So I know, we've been saying, open windows or open doors for natural ventilation. In the US, we are accustomed to doing mechanical ventilation. So outside air goes through our, HVAC unit and then comes in conditioned. It's fine to open windows, but this should be the last resort. If your system is designed for mechanical ventilation, the first very good use of funds is to hire a test and balance company and see how much outside air you have today and try to fix it. Because I assure you, when the school was designed or the office, we needed to have mechanical ventilation, and They needed to prove it in order to occupy the building. So it's there somehow. Now, this is different than basically, for example, Europe, where we do more natural ventilation. Over there, by design, you can open windows and doors. So opening windows and doors can play an important part of the solution, but I just want to reiterate, it's not on the expense of not doing the right thing, which is mechanical ventilation.
Excellent. Thank you so much for being with us today. I'm afraid that is all of the time that we have for questions today. So as I mentioned, the recording and slides will be made available of today's presentations. And if you would like to take a deeper dive into today's topics, we encourage you to visit the resources listed here. And we hope that you will join us for our upcoming webinar in this series titled Monitoring Healthy Buildings Using EMIS to Identify Issues with Ventilation, Air Quality, and Thermal Health. In this presentation, the Better Buildings EMIS team will clarify opportunities for monitoring and analytics to identify areas that need attention. And next, we encourage you to visit our newly renovated COVID-19 Resource Center. I know that Dr. Zaatari mentioned Bill Banfleth in her presentation. We do have a webinar series with Dr. Banfleth as well available on the Resource Center. If any of you wish to reference that, it's on filters and HVAC mitigation strategies. And next, we also, the Resource Center, you can learn from experts with resources from ASHRAE, EPA, DOE, and more. You can view resources by technology type, and like I mentioned, watch previous webinars. We are also excited to announce that the registration for the 2021 Better Buildings, Better Plants Summit is now open. The summit is taking place May 17th through the 20th and will feature engaging and interactive sessions along with opportunities for attendees to network with their fellow industry peers and experts. Learn more and register for this virtual no-cost event at the Better Buildings Solutions Center today. And with that, I would like to thank Marwa, Seema, and Marcus Bianchi for being with us here today and joining us. Feel free to contact us directly with any additional questions or concerns that you might have, and we can get to your, or any questions that we were not able to get to during the Q&A period. And of course, I encourage you all to follow the Better Buildings Initiative on Twitter for all of the latest news. Thank you so much.
Thank you.